Hello everyone, Ian Wishart here with another episode of the Take a Pew podcast, the show that's a bit like eating soup with a fork. I'm not sure why, it just is. And alongside me for today's feast is the man who needs no introduction, so I won't give him one.
Hello everyone, thanks Ian, but for the avoidance of doubt, I am Simon Clark.
Of course you are. Well, Simon, we've got a very special guest on the show this week.
Yes, I saw that. A bit of a change of tack as we're meeting Hollywood director George Lucas.
No, Simon. We're meeting international Christian speaker, teacher, author, broadcaster and columnist Jeff Lucas.
Oh, sorry mate.
But I can confirm that like George, Jeff is somewhat of a legend in his field. He splits his time between the UK and Colorado, where he is a teaching pastor at Timberline Church. I first came across Jeff when he was doing Bible teaching at the big Christian gathering Spring Harvest in 2001. He was, of course, very wise and knowledgeable, but he was also very amusing. And as a new Christian back then, I was delighted to find out that one can be a Christian, and even a Christian minister and leader, and still have a sense of humour and an eye for the absurd.
Sounds like a good fit for this show then, mate.
Exactly. Now, the advantage of having a guest who is quite well known is that we can find out a bit about them on Wikipedia. Did you manage to check that out, Simon?
I did indeed, and I can confirm that Jeff is 93 years old and he's written over 8,000 books.
Well, unusually for the internet, I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. But we can find out the real story right now, because this is Take a Pew with the wonderful Jeff Lucas.
Jeff Lucas.
And here we are in the delightful county of West Sussex and in the lovely UK home of our guest, Jeff Lucas. Jeff, thank you so much for having us. And please, take a pew.
Delighted to take a pew. A bit nervous though, because last time I took a pew, it was somebody else's and they'd sort of made a claim on it for the last 400 years and they told me to move. So whenever I hear that sentence, I feel a little bit iffy, but great to be with you.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks, Jeff. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. Perhaps you could introduce yourself to our lovely listeners.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Lucas, and contrary to what it said on the internet, I'm actually nearly 66. I look older. I've had a rough life. And I'm married to Kay. She's a girl. And we have 2 children. And I'm currently, oh, grief, how long have you got? I'm I'm a senior executive pastor at Timberline Church in Colorado, which is a bit daft because there's only one executive pastor. So there's pretentiousness for you. And then I write and teach and speak and broadcast on Premier Radio and do some life coaching and sleep occasionally.
Sounds busy times. But well, now, as usual on Take a Pew, we're looking forward to getting to know you, chatting about your early years, your journey through life, some of your favourite things, and of course, your perfect picnic.
Yes, as well as getting your help with an Is It True dilemma, receiving your spiritual pearl of wisdom and asking you one of my random questions.
Yes, it's a bit embarrassing. We still have to do that last bit. But anyway, Jeff, let's crack on. And in time-honoured Take a Pew style, let's begin at the beginning. Where did life start for you? I understand it was somewhere north of Buenos Aires.
Yeah, you could describe it as that. It was the spectacular location of Ilford in Essex, not remotely like Buenos Aires, really. But I grew up in East End of London, Essex boy, and no Christian background. And my dad was a POW. He escaped after 4 years in a POW camp. So I think it's fair to say that he and my mum had a fairly sort of turbulent background during the war. And so I grew up in that sort of 50s era, kind of celebrated by Call the Midwife, you know, the TV show. Not quite in the East End, on the edge of it. A happy childhood, one older brother, pretty rubbish at school because I wasn't that interested really. And my whole family, most of them were lift engineers. And the assumption was that I would also help people get to the 13th floor. but I am completely mechanically deficient. I mean, anytime I try to fix anything, the whole family would gather around for a time of intercessory screaming. So maybe God called me into ministry because he didn't want everybody to just be stuck on the third floor. Became a Christian at the age of 17, which was quite a shock to everybody, not least myself.
Yeah. So we touched on education and not being particularly keen on that, but look at the wider individual. We've got a question for you, and our question is...
What were you like at school? Were you a little bit geeky? Or were you a little bit freaky? Or were you a little bit cheeky? What were you like at school?
Yes, Jeff, what were you like at
A
school?
bit naughty, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to do RE, religious education, because I liked the teacher, had no interest whatsoever in the subject. And just to be a bit naughty, I used to signal the entire class that on my cue, we would all throw ourselves off of our chairs and lie on our backs with our hands and legs kicking in the air. I mean, I don't quite know why I did that. It
Yeah.
seems like a rather obscure hobby, really.
Seems perfectly normal, I think. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I would say that I was an average student except for English. I loved English language and literature and drama. I was totally rubbish at just about everything else, physics, chemistry. I didn't even show up for the maths exam because I knew it would be terrible. So I would say definitely not geeky. I had long hair in striking contrast to the stranded peninsula that I'm currently sporting. Yeah, I would say average student, but really encouraged by my English teacher, which probably sort of helped things out when I started writing some years later.
Brilliant. And what about outside the classroom? What did you get up to as a youngster?
Well, I was in a band, which was unfortunate for anybody with musical ears, because I was the lead singer, and often when I sing, people cry out to God, but it's not in repentance. It's sort of in agony, really. So, and I was rhythm guitarist, which again was awkward because I only had about 10 chords in my repertoire, and I was in this Christian band. Actually, in the end, they kicked me out. You know, the Lord told them that they needed to regroup, which basically meant kicking me out.
11th chord.
Yeah, exactly. So before becoming a Christian, I wanted to be in music, but sadly didn't follow up my aspiration with actually practicing the guitar a bit more. So it was fairly horrendous. But yeah, you know, really into music back then. Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple. I saw Deep Purple in a pub in Essex. Can you believe?
Wow.
Just before they went to the Wembley Stadium. Let's just say it was rather loud. And but yeah, so music, average school, not quite sure what I wanted to do, and then I ended up working for Barclays Bank. And that was short-lived, and helpfully, because otherwise I might have been completely responsible for a financial global crash. And I was rubbish at it. It was really terrible. So I worked for Barclays Bank for a year and then started exploring ministry.
Right, yeah, okay. Well, obviously you found your niche eventually. But as we look back across the whole childhood, we have another question for you. And that question is...
What's your fondest childhood memory? What's your fondest of all your childhood memories? What's your fondest?
Oh.
Yes.
Actually, it's not particularly spectacular. I mean, mine was a very working class upbringing, and without going into we used to walk barefoot in snow and all that sort of thing.
Rolled
and
up newspaper.
live in a carton.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that, but literally we did go out to eat once a year at Christmas, and it was a Mars bar on Friday night, which was the big treat. So, you know, it wasn't an affluent childhood. And it might sound a bit wet, this, but I can remember my dad, I must have been 5 or 6 or something, my dad picking me up in our living room and dancing with me.
Oh.
And I remember his hand on the back of my head, just nestling me into his shoulder. And for some reason, that image lingers with me as just something that was not spectacular, but really quite wonderful.
That's charming.
That is wonderful.
That does meet the...
It does, doesn't it?
It does, I know, and
Yeah.
you were very good with the responses there. I'm grateful. Yeah.
So Barclays didn't work out, Jeff, so take us on from there.
No, they didn't like me taking free samples home. So I had this major encounter. So I became a Christian at the age of 17. Within a couple of weeks, started to feel that God was calling me into ministry. And
That was quick.
it was really quick and stunning, really, because I didn't know the difference between the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the maps at the back. You know, I really didn't have a clue. And I went off to a youth weekend, and we had this guest speaker, a bloke called Johnny Barr, and he had a really prophetic ministry, but he wasn't weird, which is an unusual combination. You know, sometimes people hear from God and you're not quite sure whether to admire them or suggest they get help on the NHS helpline, you know. And this guy was very normal, and he stood up at the beginning of this weekend. He didn't know any of us. He was a guest speaker, and he said, on my way here tonight, God spoke to me and told me the first and last names of 3 of you who've been called into Christian leadership and ministry. I remember sitting there looking around thinking, who's that then? Anyway, on the Saturday night, I went up to him at the end of the meeting, and he'd never met me before. I'm a kid in the crowd. And I asked him a question. I didn't introduce myself, and he answered my question, and I turned to walk away, and he said, young man, your name is Jeff Lucas, isn't it?
That's amazing.
And at that moment, I wasn't sure what my name was, to be honest. I was completely gobsmacked, to use a theological term. Yeah. And I said, yeah. And he said, God has called you into ministry, hasn't he? And I said, I think so. And he said, well, get on with it then. Amazing. And so that was, I remember, guys, just going to bed that night and crying myself to sleep, because there was this staggering insight that God really did know my name and knew where I'd been and my history. And sometimes I'm reluctant to share that story because people can think that that's normative for every Christian, that it always happens like that. And I've got a theory that God looked at me and thought, he's a bit thick. So he needs someone to really shout at him to get his attention and let him know that I want to do this with him. But that was the beginning. I went off to Bible college. But while I was in Bible college, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, Kay, she moved to Peterborough, and we were invited to plant a church on a housing estate in Peterborough. And so while I was in college, I'd go up at the weekends, and we knocked on doors for 6 weeks. We went door to door, inviting people, praying that no one would be in, because we didn't really want to actually really talk to anybody, particularly people with Alsatians. And at the end of the 6 weeks, we had a dozen or so people, and it went from there, and we built a building and planted another church. And so at the age of we got married when I was 22, actually 21, Kay was 18. And I was a minister at 22, and she was a minister's wife at 18. Completely barking mad, really.
Yeah, so that all happened so quickly.
It really did.
What sort of church tradition was that?
Well, that was Elim, which is a Pentecostal church. Yeah. And Elim gave me my first opportunity for ministry. Not only that, guys, but in our congregation, this, you know, it grew 40, 50, 100, 150 people, and we built a building, and we had people in the church in their 70s and 80s who'd walked with the Lord for decades. And there's this 22-year-old kid standing up telling them how to live on a Sunday morning. And they were so kind and would nod knowingly at my stunning pearls of wisdom, even though looking back on it, I found some of the sermon notes, you know, some of it was total drivel, really, but they were kind. And that kind of launched us, and we were in that church for 7 years.
Okay, but that came to an end.
What happened is, I had a guest speaker come to the church, and he preached that morning, and then he said, I'm involved with starting this new thing. It's called Spring Harvest. And he said, it's happening in a couple of weeks. And he said, would you like to come along and speak? I mean, he'd never heard me preach. It's completely ludicrous. And I said, yeah, all right then. And went along and stood up in front of 1,000 young people, absolutely terrifying. And so through Spring Harvest, ministry started to widen, and then we we went to America and we discovered that Americans are irrationally kind to British people. I can't understand it, but it's like you could read the telephone directory. Remember those telephone directories? And people would say, wow, that's really classy. That sounds great. And I discovered that I could say things in America that American Christian leaders couldn't say because I was British. So they thought, oh, bless his heart, he doesn't know that he's really confronting us in a loving way, or they were just really open. And so we went to America, and I had a kind of an itinerant Bible teaching ministry for about 5 years. And then we came back to the UK and became involved with Revelation Church in Chichester, which was kind of like a youth church plant. And it kind of went on from there, really.
So when you say we went to America, and how did that happen?
Well, again, it was
just random.
It was one of those, what seems to be, I've come to the conclusion that there are hinge days in our lives where, that one encounter, that one conversation changes everything. But you don't see it coming. God doesn't send you an email to let you know, by the way, this is a junction moment in your life. It's a turning point. And we were thinking and praying about perhaps going to America. And then I was invited to become the co-leader of a really large church here in the UK. And I thought, this is a tremendous opportunity. I've got to do this. And then we were invited by this guest speaker who came to our church. He said, do you want to come and join my team for 6 months and then launch out in this new ministry? Well, I wanted to go to the church here in the UK, but we prayed about it and just felt that God called us to actually go to what was really the backside of the desert. It was the middle of nowhere in Oregon, where real men hunt and wear camouflage pajamas just in case they bump into a deer in the middle of the night so they can shoot it, and felt completely disoriented, but went to America and just spent 5 years encouraging local churches to be the church. I'm really passionate about the value of the local church, and so spent 5 years doing that.
Yeah,
what were some of your best moments then in the States?
Well, I just found an amazing openness and a real sense of, Americans are incredibly generous. I'm not talking about paying me lots of money. I'm talking about missions and resourcing charities. They are incredibly generous. And so watching the sense of vision that often they had, there were some more challenging times as well. There's a lot of competitiveness in the American church. And so I'd go to a church in a particular denomination, but they wouldn't invite other churches, even in their own denomination in the city, because they were scared that, they might lose people to that church. And so one of my more interesting moments, and it was more recently, and I don't want to tiptoe into the politics of it, but I went to the National Prayer Breakfast in DC, and it was Trump's first year. So I sat about, 50 feet from Trump and watched him for a couple of hours. Let's just say it was interesting.
Well, it must have been fascinating.
Just a quick question. Do you think, was it his real hair, do you think?
I tell you what, you wouldn't buy a wig like that, would you? It was interesting, the sense of confusion that I felt about just how quickly the American evangelicalism seemed to line up with this guy, despite the fact that, not being gossipy here, his public morals have been quite separated from some of the statements that he's made in terms of his belief system. So, I just watched him, and it was an interesting exercise. I love people watching anyway. My wife and I go out for dinner. Sometimes we don't talk to each other. We just listen to the table next door. I'm thinking about buying her surveillance equipment for Christmas. We love listening to other people's conversations. And so it was fascinating to watch him and to watch the way he reacted when other people were speaking and did well. I'll just leave it at that.
Right.
Oh, interesting.
Nice. Yeah. So let's pick up at Revelation, not the book of the Bible, the church. Yeah, the church. It was a church that was a youth group that started flourishing in a church in Chichester. And the leadership of the church, the local vicar, realised that their church, if I can put it like this, was not a wineskin that could cope with this. And so very graciously released them to start their own church. And so you call it a charismatic new church, really.
And by the time we came back, it was probably 800 or 900 people. It was really exciting, a massive church planting agenda. It was a time when a lot of people had negative equity on their homes, and people would sell their houses with massive negative equity to move into another area to plant a church. It was absolutely stunning and a real privilege to be part of that. And we were part of that for 11 years. And then further things opened up with Timberline Church in Colorado.
Yeah, so let's get into that then, because that's another seemingly sort of fairly random place to get involved in. What was behind that?
Yeah, I used to go and preach at the church. I'd go to America 3 or 4 times a year and preach in various churches. And I'd been doing that for Timberline for about 10 years and really always enjoyed it and sensed there was a real connection there. And one time we were just on holiday actually in the Denver area, and we were due to meet the senior minister of the church and his wife just for coffee. And I got up that morning and I just said to the Lord, I like these people and I wouldn't mind doing more with them, but you'll have to set it up. I'm not going to say anything. It was one of those sort of prayers. And we met for coffee, and bear in mind, we had a 10-year relationship at that point. And about 10 minutes into our coffee, Darry Northrup, the senior minister, said to us, have you ever thought about basing here and being part of the church here and going out from here in your wider ministry? And I said, yeah, about an hour ago. And he said, okay, let's talk about it. So we did. And for that reason, guys, I felt like there's been a really sort of strong calling and connection to the church. And, that was 21 years ago now. Timberline Church is probably, it's got an orbit of around 10,000 people in a city of only 140,000. So everywhere I go, there's people from the church. So it's a large church. So yeah, it's a very exciting, lively, problematic, challenging church, like all churches. I think we can get the impression that a big church doesn't have the kind of problems that smaller churches experience. Well, the trouble is it's all full of human beings like us, isn't it? And meandering around and fighting over pews, as was alluded to earlier, and particularly the last couple of years, fighting over, do I wear a mask, don't I wear a mask? What about vaccination, not being vaccinated? It's all a hoax. All of the tensions that have been faced by Christian leaders. And as a Christian leader, you can't win. You just can't win because you find yourself stuck in the middle of it. But I passionately believe that isolated, solitary Christianity is a misnomer. We're called to fly in formation, and that's challenging, but it's wonderful too.
Were the churches closed over in the States?
Yeah, we were closed for about a year, and so everything went online. Now we're open again fully, and I would say, and this is a general stat I think that most people would agree with, we're probably 65% back. But I read a statistic the other day in Christianity Today where they said about 30 to 35% of Christian leaders that they surveyed were actually thinking about packing it all in and doing something else, because it has been it's been a really difficult time.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about that.
Jeff, can I ask you, do you have to change your style much? You have to switch back in when you're going over to the States, coming back here?
Very slightly. I mean, Americans are a little less open to, surprisingly perhaps, talk about sensitive subjects like sex, for example. In the British church, we are fairly relaxed with appropriate conversations about some of those difficult subjects, but generally not. And in fact, to be honest, chaps, I play the British card pretty hard. I'm always talking about chatting with the Queen, and I've never met her. And, having fun with my Britishness and driving on the wrong side of the road. And I probably overplay it a bit, but people seem to like it. Very early on in ministry, I learned that I needed to be myself. And so I love humour. And I'd go to some churches to speak, and I got in trouble. One bloke came up to me and he said, "We don't have fun in our church. We have joy." And I took one look at him. He looked utterly constipated, and I thought, you haven't got neither one, mate. You need bran. That's what you need. And so occasionally I got in trouble with that stuff. But I also think that as a Bible teacher, laughter is a wonderful learning device. Because when you laugh, you got it. Something's connected, isn't it? You've seen the funny side of it. It's actually a learning mechanism, and also it relaxes people. If teaching is always about an intense, furrowed-browed woman or man who's looking like they're struggling with some abdominal complaint, that's not exactly winsome. I have learned that, I don't mean that in an arrogant way, I've got to be me, I did it my way, Mr. Sinatra. What I do mean is I need to be the person that God has called me to be. See, I wanted to be just perceived as deep, which some Christians sort of say, well, that was really deep. Now, sometimes what they actually mean is, I didn't understand a word of that. How about you? But I wanted to be Martin Lloyd-Jones, but not dead. I wanted to have that sort of gravitas. The irony of the teaching thing, guys, is that sometimes the better teacher you are, the more likely you are to be written off as superficial, because you take things that are substantial and do have depth, and you make them accessible to people. But then there are some people out there who go, well, I understood that, so it can't be that learned.
Too dumbed down.
I know. So anyway, that's been a challenge. But without sounding like an 80s pop song, I've got to be me. And
quite right too. No, I think that sounds a commendable path, and it's also the first time I think we've had the word winsome on the podcast, isn't it? Yes.
It's a good word, isn't it?
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, no.
Well done.
Yeah. I'll see if I can throw another unique word in.
So have you made the church over there by a teapot?
No. I have got a kettle in my office.
Okay, good. Start.
They drink iced tea, which I think is demonic behaviour, probably the death of civilization as we know it. So, but I don't drink tea when I go out to restaurants, because they bring the hot water in what is surely a specimen bottle from the local hospital. It is lukewarm and it is just wrong. So we drink tea at home, and it's British.
A little oasis.
Yes, exactly. And we lift our little fingers as we... Why do people do that little pinky thing?
Very odd.
It's odd, but yeah.
It's better than lifting up a foot or something. That would be weird.
Yeah, because the blood might... Yeah, it
that
could
would be very strange. So talking of home over there, is it... I read that you live in a place called Loveland.
Yeah,
Is that actually true?
Yeah, and sometimes when I say that, my wife laughs out loud. I can't think why.
What an amazing name for a place.
Yeah, it's Loveland. In fact, around Valentine's Day, you drive through our city and there are these wooden hearts everywhere on every lamppost with people sending messages. And hundreds of thousands of people send Valentine's cards through the Loveland post office just so that it can be stamped coming from Loveland.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's about an hour north of Denver, about 4,800 feet up in the air, which means if you scratch your head, you've had a workout because the oxygen is so thin. But it's very beautiful. Looking out of our window, we can see what they call a 14er, which is a 14,000 foot mountain.
That sounds like a lovely place. You do such a lot, Jeff. I mean, whether you're over there or over here in terms of columns and writing books. I think it's 32 books rather than 8,000.
Not 8,000.
Yeah, I think it's slightly fewer than that.
Feels like 8,000.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. And obviously preaching and teaching. And one thing that occurred to me is, how do you keep coming up with the inspired material?
Well,
because you can't reuse stuff a lot, can you, really?
Well, you can reuse stories in preaching, you know, and, my lovely wife, Kay, she travels with me, so she's heard some of my stories 4,000 times, and she still laughs, bless her, which might just be an act of mercy, I'm not sure. But it just seems to work. And I've been writing the back page column for Christianity magazine for over 20 years now, so I have to come up with another column every month, and I write daily Bible reading notes, which Life with Lucas. So I'm writing every day, but actually it's been a really good discipline for me. It's been, my Bible college education wasn't terribly extensive, mainly because I was an arrogant young thing who just wanted to get out and change the world by next Tuesday and didn't really care what the Greek said about that.
And you were only about 6 at the time anyway.
Well, I was, yeah. So, I mean, I was more worried about graduating from nappies at that point. But through the years, sermon preparation, writing study guides for spring harvest, daily Bible reading notes, it's been a theological education all by itself. So, yeah, and obviously there's going to come a time when transition will come, but who knows when that is.
You got something in the pipeline at the moment?
No, I just did a book called Singing in Babylon, Finding Purpose in Life's Second Choices, which seemed really timely for the whole COVID crisis and where we find ourselves currently in the world at the moment. But I've decided with books, you can get into multiple contracts and you do a book and then you've got to do another book. So I've just decided to press pause on it at the moment. I'm concentrating on writing these Bible notes and trying to take Bible reading notes into another zone. So we've got QR codes on the notes, they're digital as well. You can go onto a website, there'll be videos from me, small group materials. So it's, I think it's a new level of daily Bible reading notes that can help people. So I'm concentrating on that at the moment.
Sounds great. So of all the things that you do, it's probably an impossible question, or an impossible answer at least. What do you genuinely enjoy doing the most?
Well, I mean, one of my challenges is I love, most of the time I love everything that I do. And for a couple of
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, for a couple of hours a week, I hate everything that I do. If, I allow myself that luxury, particularly with deadlines or if I'm really tired, which is most of the time. I love being in front of an audience and communicating. There is something about watching that connection, seeing that smile, catching that tear. There is something amazing about that. Communicating, for example, at Spring Harvest, 4,000 or 5,000 people is an exhilarating experience, not just because it's a big crowd, but it's a communication challenge. I genuinely am very, very afraid of speaking to groups of less than 12. They terrify me. And the reason for that, guys, is first of all, I can see their faces. So if they just think I'm an idiot and they show it on their face, that becomes really clear. And then if you're using humour with 12 people, 6 of whom are disinterested, 2 of whom might be actually clinically dead because they haven't moved for a couple of hours. If you say something humorous, you get a, which is not exactly a wave to surf on. When they do that look, and they roll their eyes. And so, but I think the last thing to go for me in the various things that I do will probably be public speaking. Yeah. I love the process of gathering the material and I love the experience of delivering it. Just the sense that when someone says they've been helped by that, there's something amazing about that. That is such a privilege to be able to be part of their journey. The only exasperating thing is when you speak in public, it's like getting up there with a bucket of seed and chucking it everywhere and you hope for the best because you just don't know what's really going to make any impact with people's lives.
Obviously there'd be way more impact than you'd ever realise, isn't there? I think,
well, you hope so, and sometimes people will come back years later. I mean, you said at the beginning of the programme, Ian, that as a young Christian at Spring Harvest, you were encouraged by the event and by my participation in the event. We've not met before today, although I thought I bumped into you when I went doing some prison visitation.
Yeah, that was a dark period in my life.
No, that wasn't you. No, you look familiar, that's all.
But anyway, that all sounds incredibly busy, Jeff. What do you do to relax?
I like to walk. Kay and I love walking either here in Sussex or in Colorado. And we like films, and also we got out of the habit a little bit lately, but generally speaking, we try and work out 3 or 4 times a week, and that's sort of helpful to me. I mean, throwing something a bit more serious here, chaps. Quite a number of years ago, I went through a season of clinical depression, and that was rough. And as a Christian leader, not only did I feel bad, but I felt bad because I felt bad. There's still this irrational shame that's associated with depression. And actually, I don't want to take us into too dark a place, but the last couple of years with COVID and everything have been quite a challenge emotionally for me. But I do find if I walk, if I can get out in the open air, if I can exercise, that's been incredibly helpful.
It's funny because I looked at something the other day, a YouTube thing, and it was an interview with you, and you quoted Adrian Plass saying, feelings are not the barometer of our spirituality.
Yeah. Adrian really helped me with that years ago, in that Christians can feel that if they feel sad, that there is something deeply spiritually wrong with them. And actually, you look at the Bible, whether it's Jeremiah, who definitely threw his toys out of the pram on more than one occasion, whether it's the Apostle Paul, who wrote to the Corinthians, who were having a bit of a punch-up with him, and he said, in our hearts we've been feeling the sentence of death. Well, you don't normally see that in a prayer letter from a missionary, do you? Greetings, friends. We've been feeling deathly lately. Hallelujah. Send us some cash. You don't normally get that kind of message. I think Jesus was depressed in Gethsemane. He said, my soul is overwhelmed. The word there is bario, which means barometer, pressed down, depressed. So one of the things I've tried to do through the years is be a lot more open about mental health issues. I did a book called Faith in the Fog, which outlined some of my own struggles. And again, it's just been lovely, gratifying to have people say that encouraged them, because depression makes you feel isolated, particularly if you're in a church where excitement is required. And, we're all on the edge of ecstasy all of the time about life. That can be an incredible pressure. So I try to be honest and open about that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you're very blessed to live in two wonderful spots on the planet for walking and exercise. And
yeah, it's gratuitous, really. But, there we go.
Very good. But in that vein, I'm pleased to report it's nearly time to unfurl the picnic blanket and delve into your perfect picnic, Jeff. And that means that it's the part of the show where we play our little game called My Favourite Things.
My favorite things.
Yes, this is a very simple game, Jeff. We give you 5 categories and you just have to tell us your favourite thing in that category.
Sounds good.
Easy. Yes, our first category is always your favourite book of the Bible.
Favourite book of the Bible would be Mark's Gospel, because he just gets to the point. I like that. And not suggesting that the others blether on, but I really like Mark's Gospel.
Okay, if you had to go Old Testament?
Esther and Ruth, they're both...
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I love stories, and it's both those stories are pretty much happy ever after. So that's nice.
Good stuff. Okay.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Try this one then, Jeff. Your favourite shop?
My favourite shop would be a Nordstrom Rack in Colorado, because it's posh designer clothing at knockdown prices. I'm basically cheap, and so I really like, and it's one of those shops you have to go digging for stuff, but you might just come up with a triumphant deal. It's 95% discount. Hooray. So yeah, Nordstrom Rack. Probably a bit obscure to your listeners, but
No, I like that one.
Yeah.
Your favourite shop, Ian?
Well, funny, talking of America, and you talked in these terms when you talk about Oregon, Jeff, but we've got a shop when we go to America. We go as a leisure activity. It's a chain, I think, over there. It's called Pro Bass or Bass Pro or something, and we call it the Hunt and Shoot and Fishing Shop. And we just go there for a look around, but it's full of the camouflage pyjamas that you talked about, for example. It's full of guns, it's all the fishing equipment, it's duck calling things. It's just a fascinating place to go.
It's the all outdoorsy person's paradise, really. I wander around and never buy anything because, it's a good shop.
It's great. We went to Las Vegas quite a few years ago, and we only had a couple of days in Las Vegas, but we spent one whole afternoon driving out to this Pro Bass shop that we found that was there, and look around. Of all the things to do in Las Vegas, we did that, but it was very weird. But anyway, what's yours, mate? Probably guitar shop.
Yeah, I'm a guitar geek, so there's a place called Anderton's Music in Guildford. You just go in the door and you can smell the guitars, and it's just wonderful.
Nice.
Anyway,
very sad.
Very sad.
So our third category, Jeff, is always top 5, and in this season it's always the same category. So it's your top 5 films.
Yeah, top 5 films. One sounds really bizarre. It's called So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Oh, yes.
And it starred Mike Myers. And it sounds like a horror movie, but it really isn't. It's a kind of spoof on San Francisco coffee house culture and poetry. And it's just some amazing dialogue in it. I thought Russell Crowe's Gladiator was quite something. He stole my physique, but apart from that... Do you remember Battle of Britain, the original Battle of Britain film? And that's because, 7 miles from where we are sitting today is Tangmere, which is where my grandmother used to live. Okay. And that whole village was closed off during the war because it was the Battle of Britain RAF station. Susanna York was in it.
That's right.
I remember as a teenager I really fancied her, which was probably quite wrong. And then The Courier. Have you seen The Courier? It's a 2020 film. Benedict Cumberbatch, I always mess up his name. I think that's his name. It is stunning. It is all about a British businessman in the war, true story, who because of his business contacts was co-opted by MI6. And I just think it's one of the most epic films I've ever seen.
Not sure I've seen that. Look for
look out for that.
Yeah.
And then the fifth one would, from the sublime to the ridiculous, would be Love Actually. Because I just think it's absurd and mad, but it's also quite beautiful as well. This idea that people coming into Heathrow and there really is love all around us. So those are my 5. Yeah. Can I break the rules and give you my least favourite Christian film?
Yes, please do.
It's called Thief in the Night.
Right.
And it came out when back in the 70s, an era when a fashion demon roamed the earth, mugging everybody. It was awful fashions. And it was all about the second coming of Jesus. And it was absolutely terrifying. And I remember I watched this film and, you go down to Tesco's, no product endorsement, and, Kay would disappear. And I'm thinking, oh, that's it. She's been taken and I've been left behind. And all that was going on is she was face down in a fish finger refrigerator or something. It was all rather neurotic. And that was back in the time when everyone was trying to, play Name That Antichrist games and trying to put different definitions on end time stuff. So that is I don't want to be unchristian, but scare the living daylights out of a lot of people.
I don't know whether to check it out or not now on that basis, just to see what it's like.
I showed it. We actually showed it to our kids, which I quite seriously, deeply regret, because it was just unhelpful. Now, some listeners might disagree with that. They might put it there as their favourite, but there we go.
Interesting. Well, answers on a postcard.
Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. Okay, now, Jeff, you're blessed to have 2 homes. So what's your favourite room?
My favourite room actually is my study in Colorado, because we built the house. Well, I say we built the house. I couldn't wire a 13 amp plug, but we designed the house, and it was done. It's kind of like wood panelled. And it's not very big, but it's wood panelled and there's a gas fireplace. And it's a bit British. You know what I mean? I ought to have a picture of Churchill or something on the wall, or Helen Mirren probably would be better. And it's a place where I study and work, and it's just a really enjoyable space. I actually love interior design and spaces and colours, and my wife and I both really enjoyed putting a house together. So that's my favourite room.
Excellent.
Sounds great.
Sounds
lovely.
Great. Yeah.
Well, our last category, to make it a bit easier, our final category is always multiple choice. I'll give you 3 possible answers.
Okay.
Now, we've spent a bit of time talking about Colorado, so we'd like to know your favourite collar. So I'll give you 3 possible answers.
Okay.
A dog collar, otherwise known as a clerical collar. The important structural protein collar gen. Or the Grimethorpe Colliery brass band. Your favourite collar?
Okay, it would be Grimethorpe, because it makes me feel nostalgic about not being from Yorkshire. In other words, I don't know why it resonates with me, but it just makes me think of something northern and beautiful. By the way, I just need to say, I used to wear a dog collar and I hated it because it was uncomfortable. And not only that, you have to say hello to everybody. You walk down the road and everyone, oh, here comes the vicar. You have to say hello. And so I felt like I was wearing a cut off from a fairy liquid bottle whenever I wore a clerical collar. So Grimethorpe wins it, I think.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's a great choice.
Good. That's good.
Such a lovely sound.
Yeah.
Heroes of the film Brassed Off, wasn't it?
Great film. Great.
Grimethorpe, wasn't it?
Brilliant film.
Colliery brass band.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, a splendid set of answers there, Jeff. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Which means you've well and truly earned the chance to follow the more peaceful path that is sitting on the tartan rug to enjoy an alfresco lunch. As we ask you the question,
What would you pick in your perfect picnic if the picking were up to you? Would you be sticking in some finger-licking chicken, or would you be silly and pick a lily? Tell us, what would you choose?
Yes, what would you pick in your perfect picnic, Jeff? But before we imagine the delights inside your basket, where would you like to go for your perfect picnic?
So I think it would probably be the Lake District when it's not raining, which is never. I love the Lake District. Piccalilli, I find rather delicious. My wife thinks it's thoroughly evil, we have a little bit of pickle conflict there, really. But, a nice, entertaining salad. How can salad be entertaining? But no, that's the wrong descriptor, really, isn't it? But, nice beetroot and nice pieces of chicken and a glass of extremely, extremely chilled Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, which is currently, there's a shortage. You might need to remember that in your prayers, chaps.
All right,
we can't
I wasn't aware. I'm slightly worried now. I wasn't.
Oh, totally. Yeah, there's a bit of a shortage, so there's deep concern.
Okay. Any sort of puddings or anything you'd have?
Yeah, I think Bakewell tart with a combination of ice cream and custard, which I do believe will be a concoction served in the eternal state. Whenever we get there, there'll be ice cream and custard mixed. It's the right way forward, boys.
It's a great custard and ice cream.
There's probably something prohibiting it in Leviticus somewhere, but it is really nice.
It is. It's definitely a special thing. Well, that sounds quite reasonably sort of healthy,
doesn't
really,
it?
but salad,
Well, it sounds like 11,000 calories to me. But I don't have a 6-pack; I have a 1-pack. So.
I have a barrel. Yes.
Yeah.
But, I hope you get to enjoy such a picnic
I
very
hope so
soon.
too.
But back to Lucas on his life. And we've talked about the past and the present, so let's quickly look to the future. And we have another question for you, this time with its very own brand new jingle.
12 years from now, where would you like to be? Working hard in a town, or chilling by the sea? 12 years from now, what would you like to be doing? Or would it mainly be the same? Or would you rather be canoeing for example?
Yes, Jeff. What would you like us to be talking about if we were having this conversation 12 years from now?
My primary ambition for 12 years from now is to have a pulse, really. Canoeing is up there with being in a coffin for me, so I would like to occupy neither one, really. I think 12 years from now, I'll be 78, so quite seriously, if I am still alive, please God, then I would like to then be in a different phase of life where I don't think I'll ever totally stop doing things as long as, quite seriously, I'm coherent, I have a contribution that I can make. But I would like it to be at a totally different pace and a much quieter life, really. That would be my ambition, I think. But above all, to be breathing, that would be helpful.
Well, it's young these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's still young these days.
Yeah.
Do you imagine being in one place at some point?
Yeah, there's going to come a time. I mean, I've done, probably 3 million miles popping backwards and forwards across the Atlantic. So I would quite like to not be flying. A lot of people, when they transition or retire, whatever the word is, they say, I want to travel. Well, I've traveled all over the world all my life. So I'd like to, my ambition is to not travel. And we will be back here in England, probably in this place where we are today. And my ambition will be to stroll down the lane and enjoy the South Downs and perhaps have a dog, although I'm not sure. I might have a virtual robotic dog. Because they don't poo, do they? So,
Well, I'm sure you can get those.
You can probably get them to do. Yeah.
That'd be very authentic, but
It would be.
Yeah, I'd like to have the non-pooing robotic dog.
Perfect. That sounds like a
excellent.
perfect ambition.
That's fantastic.
Well, we wish you every blessing wherever life takes you, Jeff. And with that, we hurdle the last fence and gallop toward the finishing post of the show. And this final furlong brings with it a whole new level of intellectual and spiritual rigour.
Yes, we look forward to your spiritual pearl of wisdom very shortly. But first, we need your help with another important question relating to faith and the Bible, Jeff. And we call this part of the show...
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Yes. Is it true? And this time we have unearthed a very intriguing story concerning Jesus himself. Now, we hear of Jesus going to Jerusalem with his parents when he was 12, but then we hear nothing more until he starts his public ministry, most likely in his late 20s. And so we wonder, naturally, what he got up to in the intervening period. And there appears to be some support for the theory that, contrary to his father's wishes for him to be in the carpentry business, Jesus actually spent several years running Nazareth's most successful greengrocers. And this grounding in greengrocery is evident in Jesus' frequent references to fruit in particular, illustration of the grapevine, his control over a fig tree, and of course even telling his disciples to go and bear fruit, or perhaps even sell fruit and veg. So, Jeff Lucas.
Is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Is it true?
Well, I mean, it's an intriguing theory, isn't it? But I think, to use a theological term, I do believe it's utter tosh and is not true at all. Of course, you know, Jesus used these illustrations because he lived in an agricultural culture. So I don't think he had to be lobbing out the cucumbers in order to do that, any more than the fact that he was obviously really good with wine, which was not the only reason he was invited to parties. I'm sure he was a sparkling guest, but that doesn't suggest that he actually ran an off license. So I would say absolutely spurious.
Really, that's disappointing, isn't it, really? But because I did hear there was an unfortunate incident with an overripe pomegranate.
Really?
Yeah, and that's when he went back to Nazareth during his ministry. And the Bible says something like that the people said, "Isn't that Mary's boy, a carpenter?" and that sort of thing. But actually they were saying that's the overripe pomegranate bloke. That's why he got such short shrift when he went back to Nazareth.
Well, I maybe you should start a whole new denomination based around fruit appreciation.
Fruit appreciation.
Yeah.
There was a
I would
positive thing
say
that came out of
in
this.
my entire Christian ministry, this is the most novel approach to Bible study that I've ever encountered. And think about the worship songs. "Oh Lord, we thank you for the courgette." You know, it could be, but it's difficult to rhyme with courgette.
Yeah, that's a
so it's
difficult
never
one.
going to catch on.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
We share the peas, don't we? We say, "Let us pray." I mean, there's all sorts of things. So anyway, you think that's completely spurious,
Totally.
and utter
Yeah.
tosh.
I'd go so far as to say heretical, really.
Really?
Yes, I think you
gosh.
probably should be tried in an ecclesiastical court for disseminating such
Yes.
vegetable-like rumours. But I'm not going to tell anybody.
Well, I think we've crossed the idea that might be true, in case anyone else is trying to purvey such rubbish. But with that, Jeff, perhaps you would bless us with your spiritual pearl of wisdom.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Sometimes people ask me what my favourite passage of the Bible, my favourite episode is, and I absolutely know what that is. It's found in John chapter 21, where after the resurrection, where the disciples were bewildered, confused, doubting, didn't know what was going on, they bump into Jesus. They'd had a night of fishing. He used to fish at night in Galilee and sell the catch in the morning, but that night they caught nothing, and suddenly a chap appears on the beach. Jesus had told them that he would go ahead of them in Galilee and meet them on a mountain, so they didn't expect him to meet them on a beach. And in fact, he did meet them on the mountain later. You can read about it in Matthew 28. So Peter goes splashing up onto the beach and Jesus is there. And what has the resurrected Jesus done? He's cooked breakfast for his friends. He must have either gone shopping or fishing that morning, because there's already fish that's cooking. I don't know, he might have stood on the side of the beach and just said, "Haddock, come forth." If you want to believe that, you can. But it looks like he certainly found a way to provide breakfast for his friends. And then he said to Peter, "Do you love me more than these?" Most people think that Jesus was saying to Peter, "Do you love me more than these other disciples love me?" But I'm not sure about that, and neither are some modern commentators. I wonder whether Jesus was saying to Peter, "Do you love me more than you love fishing?" Why? Well, Fisherman Peter wouldn't have to worry about martyrdom or persecution or the pure doctrine of the church or leadership or any of that stuff. He'd just have to go fishing, come home, nothing on the TV for another couple of thousand years, so another early night, get up the next day and go fishing. In other words, just survive. And I think sometimes we can be tempted by that. Just surviving. We don't want a purpose-driven life. We don't want to worry about the bloke next door or making poverty history. We just want to get on with our lives. But Jesus invited Peter to a life of destiny, risk, even paying the ultimate price in dying as a martyr. As followers of Jesus, mere survival just won't work for us. We've been kissed by a greater vision.
It's a spiritual pearl of wisdom.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeff. And that brief foray into things that really matter brings us to the very last part of the show, where Simon brings up things that really don't matter at all. And we call that...
Simon's Random Question.
Simon, what's your random question for Jeff?
Well, Jeff, my random question for you is very simple, and it's this. If you had to wear one item of clothing 24 hours a day for 1 week, and just to be clear, you're not allowed to take it off at all, which item of clothing do you think would be the most uncomfortable and or make you look the most silly?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Wow, it's one that I've never ever pondered in my entire life.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it would have to be a balaclava, really.
Ooh, good
you know,
shout, good
an item
shout.
of clothing which is normally used either in extreme cold or while one is robbing a bank. So I think that could be the most uncomfortable, because either I'd be sweating my brains out or be arrested for suspicious behaviour. I would have to say a balaclava.
That's a very...
Have you ever worn one before?
I did when I was about 9, and I think it was probably punishment for something that I'd done. And I do believe actually they're quite helpful for skiing. And when we go skiing in Colorado, and I'm not a very good skier, it's more of a downhill spasm, really. People tend to phone 999 when they see me sort of trundling down the hill. But a balaclava is very helpful because you go up on a lift and it's freezing cold. And I don't like being cold, which is why, you know, I honestly feel like the Lord is calling me to beach missions in Hawaii, because that would be better. But a balaclava is not a fashion item that I would generally choose. So that would have to be...
Yes, no, I think it's interesting that you say that you had a balaclava when you were younger, because I had a balaclava when I was young, and actually I think a lot of people had.
Yeah,
it's
I think
the
I
sort
had.
of thing
Yeah.
you had. I
Yeah.
don't know anyone that's
Yeah.
got a balaclava now.
But fashions have changed. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
the fashions of the 70s. You know, I wore a tie that was bigger than my head. And then I had wide lapels on my jacket. You know, a gust of wind would have taken me to Botswana. Do you remember flared? You're not old enough to remember flared trousers.
Just about, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you'd go down the high street and children and small animals would get caught up in your flares. And then platform heels. What was that about? Staggering around, developing a chiropractic problem. It was, but we look at photographs of ourselves back then and we're like, why did we wear that? Well, the worrying thing, of course, is 12 years from now, as you put it, will we look back on ourselves in what we're wearing today? You know, particularly that green velvet item that you've got on today, Ian.
Yeah, that's shocking,
Listeners
and I can't believe you
can't
went for
actually
that.
see
Yes.
crushed velvet as well. Very unusual get up.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't realise you could see my underwear, but
Just peeking out above your jeans.
yeah, balaclava. I mean, actually, I was similar. I was thinking ski boots. I mean, wearing
Yes.
ski boots 24 hours a day for a week, that would be...
Do you know, I hate ski boots.
It's difficult.
Can you imagine the smell
They're
as
horrible.
well?
They're horrible
Yeah.
because you're freezing cold. You're in a sort of this sub-zero temperature, and you've got to clip these things on, which make your feet rigid,
Yeah.
and guarantee a broken leg if you're falling over. So, I'm going skiing actually with our grandsons in a few weeks, and I'm not quite sure why. It's like, yeah, it's what
Yeah,
you
it
do.
doesn't sound like you're relishing the idea.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
wearing anything really for all the time. I did wonder, when Arctic explorers are on the go, do they have to wear the same clothes like all the time? Because you can't really change. I mean, a serious question. They must be horrific. I never thought about that really before. Do they change their socks every day? Or
Do you know, Ian, we've only just met, apart from our prison encounter, and I'm stunned, really, by the depth of intellectual inquiry in which you engage. I feel like
It's impressive.
you have a future in making a philosophical contribution to the life of the world. You carry on this line, because I feel like, you carry on like this, you're going to discover the secret of black holes.
Yes.
Right now you're on Arctic socks, so it's a long journey, but very commendable.
We get there. I think
Well,
we'll get there.
there we go.
Yeah.
Well,
YouTube.
Simon,
Okay.
I was rather hoping that your random question would for once be of any use whatsoever, but clearly we'll have to wait for another day. But that was...
Simon's random question.
And so, Jeff, there we are. We finally hit the buffers of the intercity journey that was this episode of the Take a Pew podcast. It's been absolutely brilliant chatting with you, not to mention a good old laugh. Thank you for putting up with us, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much.
And dear listeners, thank you for joining us once again. Fear not, another carriage of the Take a Pew train will be with you very soon. Don't forget to follow us on social media or subscribe to the YouTube channel. In the meantime, it's Toodle Pip from me.
And tatty bye from me.
Join us again next time as we take a pew.
Take a pew.